Hello and welcome to Mystery Us. I'm Tony Pratt, your host for Mystery Us. And our guest on this edition of the program is Dr. Michael Cremo, author of the controversial bestseller Forbidden Archeology. And his latest book is Human Devolution, a Vedic alternative to Darwin's theory. Welcome to Mystery Us, Michael. Or should I say welcome back to Mystery Us?
Well, it's great to be back here again with you and all your viewers.
Great. Now, there was an NBC special called The Mysterious Origins of Man.
Kind of similar to your title.
Right, right. And in fact, Charlton Heston was the narrator, and
That's right.
It was really a big-time TV special. But you had a lot of people from the academic world and some scientists who were wanting you to be banned from the airwaves. How do you respond to that?
Well, it's sort of typical of what you'd expect. This was the first television program, to my knowledge, that aired on a mainstream television network that challenged the Darwinian theory of evolution. So it caught the Darwinist evolution scientists completely by surprise when they turned on their televisions on a Sunday night and saw this come out on NBC. Of course, this was in the year 1996, but the program has been broadcast many times since then. I think they've recently released a new DVD that has a lot of the outtakes, things that didn't make it onto the show itself. But when they were filming this program, I told the producer, Bill Cote, that there were some very interesting artifacts in the Museum of Anthropology at the University of California at Berkeley, some 50-million-year-old human artifacts from the California gold mines.
Right.
And this completely challenges the Darwinian theory of evolution, because they think humans like us came into being only far more recently,
Sure.
having evolved from more primitive ape-like ancestors. So he went to the museum, but they refused to allow him to film those objects. And then when the show aired, scientists in America, the Darwinist scientists, were completely outraged. They were completely surprised, and they became even more angry when they learned that NBC was going to show this program a second time. So they made a huge campaign on the internet to get scientists from all over the world to write to the chairman of the General Electric Company, which owns NBC, asking him to tell NBC, don't show this program again. Now, I'm happy to say that NBC didn't do that. Actually, they made publicity telling the American people, watch the program, the scientists don't want you to see.
Yeah.
So then they became even more angry, and they were especially angry because they knew I had something to do, with this program. They didn't like my views, and they actually went to the Federal Communications Commission, a group of these scientists, and tried to get the FCC to investigate NBC, censure NBC, fine NBC millions of dollars so they never do anything like this again. So I thought, okay.
Fine them for what? What would be the crime? I mean,
well, for
telling the truth.
I mean, that's what I think it would be. But I think, according to their point of view, that they didn't want to see this information out there, because the idea that children would be seeing something on television on NBC that completely contradicted what they were telling them in the schools really upset them. And they were also afraid that, and this is documented from email messages that were circulating among scientists at the time, they were also afraid that, well, perhaps this would filter down to the political representatives. They might stop their funding, so they were very concerned about that.
Maybe they should stop their funding.
I think for certain kinds of research, what I think is this. I don't think that they should be given an artificial monopoly in the education system. Most people in America don't accept the Darwinian theory of evolution. There are growing numbers of scientists who don't accept it. There are intelligent design theorists and creationists of various kinds who don't accept that theory. And I think that's a fact. It has to be recognized. And I mean, normally we wouldn't tolerate our government telling us, you can only watch one kind of TV show or buy one kind of car, but now the Darwinist scientists have influenced the government, mainly through its judicial system, through the federal courts,
It's ironic that Charlton Heston, star of The Planet of the Apes, was your narrator.
Well, yes, it was, because if you remember that film, he went as an astronaut to this planet where the apes were in charge,
Yeah.
and there was an ape archaeologist who had discovered evidence that humans existed before the apes and had an advanced civilization. So
that would be your counterpart in a parallel universe.
Right, yeah, that's my counterpart in a parallel universe.
That is
absolutely
funny.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and did Charlton Heston express any views in support of this, or was he?
Well, not directly to me.
Yeah.
But I don't think he needed the money. I think he was really interested in the ideas. Of course, he'd have to. He can't speak for himself now. He's gone. But
Right.
But I don't think he needed the money to do that show.
Yeah. Now, in your book, you bring out a lot of evidence, and I'm not sure which one of your books, because I just read both of them, that a lot of prominent scientists from the past that we may be familiar with, like Pierre and Marie Curie, were involved in alternative type scientific experiments.
Well, yes, that information is something I documented in my book, Human Devolution, where I presented an alternative to the current theories of human origins. I mean, basically, today scientists say, well, we evolved up from matter. And I say, no, well, we devolved or came down from a level of pure consciousness or spirit. And there's a lot of subtle energies associated with the human organism. There are phenomena like telepathy, mind reading, and communication at a distance, and extrasensory perception, and mind over matter sorts of things. Now, when some people hear things like that, they say, well, that's not science. That is something else. That's pseudoscience. That's completely out of bounds. But such people aren't really aware of the real history of science. And one of the examples I give is the two scientists that you just mentioned, Pierre and Marie Curie. They were husband and wife. They both got Nobel Prizes in physics for their work in discovering radium and for some other work that they did as well. They discovered radioactivity. Now, you find that mentioned in every physics textbook. Every high school student will read about that. What you don't read in the physics textbook is that they were heavily involved in psychical research. They were doing research with mediums. They were doing research in telekinesis, mind over matter. For example, they did 2 years of experiments with an Italian medium named Giuseppe Palladino. And in a scientific research laboratory in Paris, they saw a large table floating about 3 feet off the ground with no one touching it in broad daylight, not in somebody's dark living room, which is the usual kind of
And it was under controlled conditions where it couldn't be magic or anything
that's
like
right.
that.
And this was just one time. And they did 2 years of experiments like this, but you're never going to see anything mentioned like this in the physics textbooks, because it goes completely against the modern scientific idea that a human being is just a combination of chemicals.
Right.
That's all. There's no subtle energies or soul or anything like that. This is the modern idea. But if you really study the actual history of science, you'll see many scientists who have investigated these things and have come to the conclusion that yes, there's more to a human being than chemicals. There's a subtle mind element with some very unusual powers, and beyond that, there is a conscious self that can exist completely apart from the brain, apart from the body. And so it's really quite interesting. Yes, there's a whole hidden history of science.
In your books, you also discuss eoliths and paleoliths.
Well,
what are they?
That goes back to my book, Forbidden Archeology, which is about evidence for extreme human antiquity, evidence that humans have existed for many, many millions of years in the past. And one category of such evidence is stone tools. Now, some stone tools are very simple. You might not even recognize them as tools unless you were an expert trained in this, because then you might be able to see, well, here, there's a certain kind of wear marks on them that show that these simple stone tools were actually used for very complex tasks, like scraping hides, for tanning or something
Yes.
like that. But then there are more advanced kinds of stone tools that you would recognize, immediately recognize. Even a child would recognize an arrowhead, stone arrowhead, on the ground. Probably many people around here found them, when they were wandering out in the woods or something like that. So those would be called paleoliths, the more advanced kinds of stone tools that you would immediately recognize. And the eoliths would be those that are a little bit harder to recognize unless you're trained.
Right. Okay, in Human Devolution, you say the theory of purely mechanical UFOs breaks down under careful investigation, and the UFOs and aliens come to resemble beings inhabiting extraterrestrial levels of the world's traditional cosmologies. Are you in effect saying angels and aliens are the same beings?
The same kinds of beings,
Okay.
I would say. I see that the whole universe is inhabited, not just this planet. Of course, this is an idea that was very common in the past,
Right.
where people understood that humans are not alone. We're part of a whole cosmic hierarchy of beings. And as far as UFOs go, there are basically two kinds of researchers there. There's what I would call the nuts and bolts kinds of researcher, who believes that, well, yes, there are beings like us on other planets who have similar kind of technology. They've been able to, refine metals and work them and make them into machines that have abilities maybe a little bit greater than we have today. But then there's another class of researchers who look at that UFO phenomenon and start to see some spiritual or paranormal aspect to it. People who have been abducted, for example, report being floated through walls, or they
Right.
report communicating telepathically with these alien beings. And one of the scientists who studied this phenomenon was Dr. John Mack, who was head of the psychiatry department at Harvard University Medical School. And he began researching this with a skeptical attitude, but in the end, after studying thousands of these cases of abductees, he concluded these people are not insane. These
Right.
people are not paranoid. They're not displaying any psychotic symptoms. They're displaying the same kinds of symptoms that, say, a soldier who'd been in some violence would display. In other words, post-traumatic stress syndrome. And he concluded that these people have undergone some actual traumatic experiences that they've reported as being abducted like this. So he wrote a book about that, and of course his colleagues at Harvard University they couldn't believe it, that one of their colleagues from Harvard University was publishing things like that.
Yeah.
So they convened an academic court to get him removed from his position, but he successfully fought that. And I'm sad to say, he died in a mysterious automobile accident in England a couple years ago. But I'd met him personally, and we were staying in touch with each other. But he had concluded that in his book, Passport to the Cosmos, he said, if we really look at all the evidence, it appears that we live in a multi-dimensional universe that's inhabited by all kinds of subtle beings. You can call them whatever you will, angels, gods, goddesses, whatever. But we're not alone in the cosmos. And that's something I deeply believe.
You mentioned humans being abducted and taken through solid walls, and I've got some friends that have claimed, that they go right through the bricks of their house when they're abducted. Now, obviously, extraterrestrial beings and UFOs, if they're coming here from far away, they have to be approaching a speed of light. And at that speed, you would run into something pretty quick. There's a lot of stuff out there, planets, asteroids, whatever, so they've got to have some kind of way that they can just go through solid.
Well, I think they're traveling by non-mechanical means.
Okay.
There's more to it involved. And we see, if we look at the Bible or any of the world's great spiritual traditions, we'll see that they give accounts of people traveling in different ways than we're familiar with, going to different dimensions, to heavens, to hells, to
Right.
and I think that's really possible. I think that that people in different times and places have developed means of travel that are different than our current means of travel, using rocket ships and airplanes and things like that.
Who was Samuel Wilberforce and Thomas Henry Huxley? And is that the same Wilberforce that this movie, The Amazing Grace, is? He's the writer of that song, and there's a movie about his life. It seems like he's probably the same guy. I don't know.
Well, Thomas Henry Huxley was the original supporter of Charles Darwin.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a very famous debate between Huxley, who was a supporter of Darwin, and Wilberforce, who was a member of he was a bishop of the Anglican Church, but also a scientist.
Mm-hmm.
They had a famous debate at an English university. And the usual story is that Huxley won the debate,
Right.
and after that, evolution triumphed.
Yeah.
But I think that's 150 years ago, and when I read over Wilberforce's statements that he made during that debate, I think they still stand up today as critiques of Darwinism, and I don't think that Huxley really defeated him at all. And I think the debate is still going on. We all know it's still going on. It's a matter of controversy between the supporters of intelligent design and Darwinism, or creationism and Darwinism. I think it's a debate that's going on. I think people have different opinions about it, and I think those differences of opinion should be reflected in the public tax-supported schools.
Right.
Now, some people say, well, that'd be, mixing God and religion or something. They think that, but actually, even Darwin talked about God in
Sure.
his book, The Origin of Species.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, in practically all the editions of that book, there's a line where he says, yes, I believe that in the beginning, God breathed, he said the Creator with a capital C. He said the
Mm-hmm.
Creator breathed life into one or a few living things and then let the rest of them evolve. Now, there are two things there. I don't believe that the evolution part of it, but I do believe the part where he says the Creator breathed life
Right.
into the first living things on earth. And that's Darwin's own words.
Right.
So if you want to say you can't mix God and religion, then the first person you should take out of the science curriculum in the public schools would be Charles Darwin and his
Right.
theory of evolution.
Now, you point out that people want a simple creation account, a simple Darwinian account, or a simple extraterrestrial intervention account. The Vedic account incorporates elements of all three. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, yes. As I said, this question about the origin of life, the origin of the species, is one that has puzzled people down through the centuries, and even today, people
Can't you
are
just give
still
us a
fighting
simple
about
answer?
it.
Where did we
Right.
come from?
That's
Yeah.
what they want. They want a simple answer that
Right.
either God created everything, or we simply evolved from apes, or the ETs brought us here.
Sure.
But I think, yes, there is God involved. There is some overall guiding intelligence involved. But I think there's also a kind of evolution, but not the kind that Darwin talked about. He thought the first living thing was a very simple, single-celled organism, and that you go from there to the more complex types. I think the first living things were the most complex, and that we've kind of gone down from there. And I think it's something that, and also I think it's something that just doesn't happen on Earth. I think there's life everywhere in the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And well, even modern science has this program of searching for life on Mars. That's what
Yeah.
they're going there now to find out if there's water there, if there's
Mm-hmm.
any sign of life on Mars. So I think, yes, there is life. not simple life, but very complex, intelligent forms of life in other parts of the universe and other levels of the cosmos. So I think it's a very complex tapestry where we have elements of God guiding this whole process, where we have elements of a kind of evolution. I call it devolution, not
Right.
evolution. And also there's an extraterrestrial element to it.
So do you think the extraterrestrials in some way genetically enhanced humans in the past, or somehow upgraded?
Well, I mean, this is something, I think there are hints of this in a lot of the world's great wisdom traditions. For example, in the Bible, there's mention of these Nephilim, these beings who are not of the earth, but
Sons
saw
of
that,
God, right.
yeah, that they saw the daughters of the earth were fair, and they mated with them. And you find
So they're just
this,
like Earthmen.
So you find this. In well, for example, in Japan, they have the tradition of their royal family, the imperial family, descending from celestial beings. So that you have people here on Earth, if you trace their ancestry back, according to these views, their ultimate ancestors would be celestial beings from the sun in that case. So I think if you look at the whole history of the human race, taking into account all the evidence that is there, all the wisdom that's there, I think you'll see, yes, we have been, that there's more to human life than just the terrestrial element. Yeah, we're very proud these days that we've gone beyond a geocentric conception of the universe. They used to say, well, back in ancient days, people thought the Earth was the center, and now we've gone beyond that, in terms of our astronomy. But I think we haven't gone beyond it in terms of our biology. I think in terms of our biology, we're still geocentric, very Earth-centered, and not understanding there are forms of life at different levels of the cosmos, different planets in the universe.
Well, your books certainly have a plethora of evidence, scientifically, but what you do that no one else has seemed able to accomplish is that you take all the paranormal topics, or they're all included, Bigfoot, ghosts, UFOs, it's all traced back to the various cosmologies, but you make a valid scientific explanation for it, which is a much better argument than a lot of people that maybe are involved in those fields in serious research, but yet they don't really have the lingo or the methodology down.
Right, Tony. I think you're absolutely right that one of the qualities of a good scientific theory is that it lets you take evidence from many, many different fields and combine them together to answer an important question, say the origin of life or the origin of the human species. And one of the characteristics of a good scientific explanation or theory is that you don't manipulate the data set. You don't leave things out because they don't fit. Now, to make the current scientific theories of human origins work, scientists have to leave out all this archaeological evidence for extreme human antiquity that I documented in my book, Forbidden Archeology, because it doesn't fit their theories.
Right.
That means they can only accept the evidence that fits their theories. They have to leave out all this evidence for the subtle mind element with its powers of remote viewing and mind over matter, and they have to leave out all this evidence for the Bigfoot, for the different types of beings that exist in our cosmos. So to make their theories work, they have to exclude huge amounts of evidence, and plus all the wisdom that's accumulated in the great wisdom traditions of the world down through the ages. But I think what I've been able to do is take all of the evidence that's out there, all of it, and put it together in such a way that we get an answer to this very important question: who are we? Where did we come from?
Right.
And I think that has a lot of value because I'm not artificially manipulating the data set. I don't say, no, I can't believe in this because it doesn't fit my theory. If it's there, it's there. It has to be worked in.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be, this archaeological evidence for extreme human antiquity, it is there. It does have to be worked in. This evidence for the paranormal, it's there. It does have to be worked in. This evidence for the existence of extraterrestrials, it is there. It has to be part of the explanation.
Just look at all the evidence, look at
That's right.
everything and see what it means, you know, rather than prejudging it. And I think a lot of times scientists just dismiss their own evidence. They find this evidence. I mean, how much evidence has been found that they didn't even report at all, that it's just been lost probably because it didn't fit the mainstream, and so they're so worried about what, you know, their position, you know, or funding or those type of things, that they just dismiss it out of hand without really looking at it seriously.
Right. But one thing I like to say is that the world of science is not monolithic. You've got some closed minds there, you've got some more open minds there. And I think it's one of the reasons I've been invited to present my ideas at some of the leading scientific institutions in the world, like the Royal Institution in London, the Russian Academy of Sciences, other academies of science in Europe. I've been invited to speak at hundreds of universities around the world. I regularly present papers at major international scientific conferences on archaeology and anthropology and history of science. So there are some open minds out there who are willing to listen to new ideas. And I think as
And you even speak at UFO conferences.
At UFO conferences, I have a lot of different audiences. I speak for religious organizations, paranormal research organizations, UFO conferences. I have a lot of different audiences, including the mainstream scientific and university audience.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to stay in touch with all those different audiences because I think right now, in terms of the world's history, we're undergoing what I would call a major renegotiation of our whole picture of reality, what's real and what isn't. And I think there's a lot of parties to that negotiation.
I think we're out of time here, Michael. Thanks for being on Mystery Us.
Well, thank you.